Welcome to Community Conversations. We're here with Artist of the Month from December 2020, Amy Litzinger. And Amy is going to be interviewed by Tanya Winters from Body Shift. And we're going to hear all about what Amy's been doing. I think a little bit of what she's got going on in the future. And Amy, you're sort of a Renaissance woman from everything that I was reading, but particularly interested in dance. And I'm not going to introduce you too much more because Tanya is going to have that honor and has known you for quite a while. I'm going to turn things over to Tanya and Amy.
Great. Well, Amy, I'm so glad to be here with you today. I think this is going to be really fun. So since I just learned that you're not a native Austinite, why don't we start out by you just kind of talking a little bit about what brought you to Texas?
Well, my parents got transferred here by AT&T because they were moving the headquarters of SBC at the time, and they sat my parents down and they were like, "Would you like to move to Austin?" And they took about 3 seconds and they said, "No more snow in a wheelchair? Yes, please." So we moved to Austin. My dad got here in July and we finished selling the house and we got to Texas around Easter. And then I turned 9 the following December. So that was an interesting transition because in Missouri at the time, you let them know when you were diagnosed with a disability what you needed, and you got on the list based on what you needed, not on when you showed up. So
Wow.
I had so many services up to that point that I didn't even realize that I had a disability until I got here and had nothing and had to fight for everything, and camps were segregated and all this, and I was like, what is going on? So like I knew I had a disability, but I didn't realize I was different until I got here. So that was sort of oh, okay, now I have to like figure out how to function in this state. So yeah, that was an interesting, not it wasn't legislative advocacy at that point, but I had to like figure out how to introduce myself and get the accommodations that I needed.
Well, that
because Texas was also behind in inclusive education at that point, so I had to sort of jump in and be like, all right, what's going on in this crazy state?
Okay. Well, that's really awesome. Well, I'm glad that you got here. I'm definitely glad that you got here. And that kind of this is kind of a good segue to my next question, which is, how did your journey into advocacy begin?
Well, I think my journey into advocacy in general started as I started learning to talk, because from a very young age, I was really, really interested in talking to everybody that I could. And I always wanted to introduce everybody that I saw to my family and who I was. I was really interested in, talking to everybody and making sure that everybody knew me and everybody was having fun. So, I mean, you can't really introduce yourself as a kid who walks around with apparatuses without explaining, who you are and what you need. So, and I definitely think that like art was a big part of that in the beginning, because my family was really into doing art as a family and really into using art as a vehicle for some of my physical and occupational therapies. So it was like, look at this, I made this thing, look at it. It was sort of a interesting way to introduce myself, especially as I got older. Art became a way to sort of explain to my teachers and adults what I could do versus what I couldn't do. Like, maybe if I can't show you what I can do in the way that you wrote the assignment, here, here's how we can fix it into some sort of art project.
That's awesome to hear. So it sounds like, because one of my other questions is, how does advocacy work influence your art, or vice versa?
I really think a lot of times for me it's a blend. Um, Especially my theater work most of the time is usually advocacy related. Um, I don't know if you remember this, but when I was at Southwestern, we started the Theater for Social Justice Club.
Yes.
So we did a lot of work around, like, here's an issue that we see on campus, and let's put it up on stage and let our peers solve whatever problem in different ways, which, sort of lit this didn't this wasn't created this way, but we ended up that everybody in the company ended up with a disability. So our disability show was sort of obvious that we needed to do it. So that was one of our big highlights, is we all wrote a show about inaccessibility on campus.
Mhm. Well, I know you do so many things, Amy. I mean, you're a dancer, you're a visual artist, you're a writer, um, you're an advocate. I mean, you've got so many things going on with you. You've got so many things going on, and so I would like to ask this question. So, if you had to describe your art in 3 words, what would those words be?
That's a really hard question. I think the first one would be communication. I don't make art unless I'm trying to say something. And it's usually, I make art first and then I come up with, the words behind it. Um, but sometimes it's the other way around. Um, I try to make the second word inclusive, but it doesn't always happen the way I want it to be. And then I guess the third word would have to be colorful. I like using a lot of colors in and color in, different ways, because sometimes it's colorful characters, or like my use of language when I'm not doing something visual.
Okay, so I know we've talked a lot about you in advocacy and you in dance, but tell me more about how you started to dance. Like, I know you, well, or maybe you did. Maybe you have just been moving your whole life, But was there a moment or anything that really brought you into dance?
Um, well, honestly, I think the original one was family history, because I don't know if you know this, but my mom was a ballet dancer for over 20 years before she had me. Um, and the joke was that she always saved her ballet shoes in case she ever had a girl. And then she ended up having a girl who doesn't use ballet shoes. Um, so, and then of course, by the time I came along, they were falling apart so badly that no one could use them anyway. But there was always this idea when I first got diagnosed that she kept asking neurologists, like, will she be able to do X, Y, and Z kinds of art? Will she be able to follow us in what we do? And they all kept saying no. And lo and behold, she was more right than they were. I
Wow.
just do it all differently. But basically, as a little kid, I did the 3 and 4 year old ballet classes. and I used to go in my AFOs, and Mom had a rule, and this was easier in St. Louis because the way that St. Louis did their services at the time is you got a bank of hours, and you could hire high school and college students to go with your kid to any class they wanted and make any class anywhere inclusive. And what usually happened is the next year, the camp or the class or whatever would decide they didn't need a state funded person, and you could use your state funded person somewhere else once they realized how easily you could be included. So her rule was that she would help me herself in class, but we would use the hours for recitals because she didn't want to be dancing around on stage with a bunch of 4-year-olds. She wanted to watch me instead. So so that's how I started in dance. And when I got into college, I was like, hey, I've been sitting around doing finals way too much, and I would like to learn to use my body creatively. And I had just gotten out of a class on Alexander technique with Kathleen Jewell, who some of you know from actual lives.
Uh-huh.
And she said, well, you've done stuff with VSA before, why don't you check in with them? So I'd sort of been bouncing around looking at the website, and then you called me about your piece before I had ever been in a body shift class. So I ended up dancing in your piece, and I was like, this is pretty cool, I could do this. And then I actually got to one of Allison's classes after I was in your piece.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound? I did it backwards. I did a performance first, and then I went to class.
Yeah, and for everybody, the piece that Amy's talking about, it is really related to advocacy because, well, first of all, Amy, let's talk about how we met because I think that's gonna inform, you know, how we did the piece or why we did the piece. So how did we meet?
We met because in 2003, my mom went through a class called Partners in Policymaking, which was sponsored by TCDD, which tries to inform parents and self-advocates about the whole disability advocacy movement. And it's a bunch of weekends throughout a year, and each weekend is about a different piece of it. And 2 years after she went, she was asked to come back and teach your class about the legislative advocacy weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And she pulled me in. So we did that together. So that's how we met. And then we started doing advocacy work together, and eventually you asked me to be in this piece.
Yeah. So everyone, Amy taught me how to advocate. Because as you know, for those of you who don't know, I really did not identify as an advocate until I was 28 years old. I mean, obviously I've had a disability all my life, but I really didn't see myself as an advocate. I didn't know anything about disability advocacy, and so yeah, she really started the ball rolling for me. And then I think we did the piece, Amy, I think it was 2010.
Yeah.
So we were both advocating professionally. I was advocating with Texas Advocates. And were you with Parent to Parent at that time?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so both of us, one of our main issues was to decrease the waiting list, the Medicaid waiting list for services. Because because what we're finding out, I guess now, is that Texas is so far behind other states, or that's what I'm learning after hearing what Amy has to say about St. Louis.
Back then,
So,
they had started copying Texas now, which is sad, but back then they were really good.
yeah. So we were both advocating for some of the same issues, and I had just taken my danceability course, and for those of you who may not know, danceability is an inclusive method of dance. So I just finished that, and so I wanted to sort of merge the two, because for me, art and advocacy, I don't want to say they're the same thing, but they go hand in hand for me. So, so I really wanted to find a new way of educating people about what was going on in Texas for people with disabilities. So I decided, well, let's make a dance. So, I mean, we met, we came up with the choreography, and we actually did it in the Capitol, in the rotunda. So, yeah, I just remember like everybody looking down at us, and
That's when I first met Silva.
mm-hmm, and calling out. I remember the most, calling out the word change.
Right.
And that being really impactful, because we really needed a change in our legislature at the time.
Yeah, and I remember that narrative line where we all had to explain all the things that we did in our day with the help of our services, and then we just stopped. That was a really good moment for me of like, okay, I just explained my entire life, and now there's silence. Was really, really cool and like terrifying at the same time. It was cool to say it, but it was terrifying to think about that, with without the waiting list and without the funding, it just everything stops.
Mhm. Mhm. So, I do have another question for you. So, what advice would you give to someone who says they can't dance, or they're not a dancer or an artist?
Well, first of all, I'd ask them what their definition of being an artist is, because I think we have this idea built up in our head that we have to be really good at it, or that what we produce has to be liked by someone else in
Mhm.
order to qualify as being an artist or being a dancer. And that's one of the reasons I said communication as one of my words, because I think that if you're using your body or you're using colors or artistic medium to communicate something, then you're already an artist, because you're using what you're creating, or you're using movement in an intentional way to communicate something. And that way you've earned the label, whether or not someone else decides to call it art or not, or good or not, or worth the effort. If you think it was worth the effort, if it helped you with something, if one person appreciates it, you already are an artist or a dancer.
Mhm. I would say that, it's more important that you yourself get something out of making art than making sure that others like it. Um,
Right.
so that really resonates with me. Okay, so my next question is a doozy, but I feel like we can really tackle it here. So, person with a disability or disabled person, which terminology do you identify with more and why?
It's actually not a gimme, and I was really like trying to figure out how to answer that question because I actually have like a whole thing about it in my master's thesis that I wrote because for me it's a sort of a flexible identity, and it depends on the point that I'm trying to make. If I'm trying to explain an experience that's unique to disability that people without disability aren't going to understand, or something that is clearly this cannot be changed because it's a static part of my disability and my identity, then I'll use disabled. But if I'm trying to make the point that everybody could experience this at some point, or everybody is temporarily able-bodied, then I'll do with a disability. Or if I'm trying to illustrate a point that things should be more inclusive, then I'll use with a disability. Or if I'm referring to a group where people haven't explicitly said how they'd like to be identified, then I'll use with a disability usually. But people get confused because I'll switch back and forth until they get to know me well enough to see like the point that I'm trying to make by using one or the other.
Yeah, I agree with that. For me, it's I don't mind either way, you know, disabled person or person with a disability. I have to say that professionally, uh, person with a disability has been pounded in my head so much that
Agreed.
people first language has been pounded in my head so much that it's that when I say disabled person, when I'm putting the disability before the person, I always feel like you know like I'm doing something wrong.
Right. My big rule of thumb is don't correct other people with the words that they want to use about themselves. Because that
Yeah,
bothers me when people like try to correct what other people are using to describe themselves.
I do think when we're meeting with legislators and we're doing advocacy though, using person first language is really important because I think that legislators really forget that people with disabilities are actually people, you know,
Right.
and that the laws and things that they are creating really do impact a person, not their disability or their diagnosis.
Right. When I do use identity first language, I'm usually using it with specific timing or a specific audience, and I make sure that I like point out why I'm switching back and forth, which is harder to do in a legislative context because you have less time and less interaction, so I usually don't. So,
Mhm. Well, that's all my questions. Does anybody, I mean, do you have anything coming up going on that you want to tell us about, or
uh, yeah, I have a couple advocacy related things that I'm doing on Zoom tomorrow. I am doing a mock hearing for the students at the School of Nursing at UT, teaching them how to testify to the legislature.
mhm,
So that'll be fun. We do that once a term for them. It's not really arts related, but that's what I'm doing. And
mhm,
then um, later next month, I'm doing a "Is online worship really as accessible as we think"
mhm,
panel my my previous seminary, and I might pull out some art for them to explain what I think is more accessible than parts of the worship service. But and considering that my master's thesis included adding liturgical dance to the liturgy to make it a little bit more accessible, I may throw in some dance for them. Who knows how creative I'll make them be? But we'll see. But those are the two big things that are coming up for me soon.
Okay, so I thought of a question.
Okay.
So
Because
in
I
terms,
have a request
oh,
too.
okay.
No,
So
you go.
okay. So in terms of advocacy, knowing that we're in a legislative year, and that the legislature, just started, what are some of the important issues you think that people with disabilities need to know about or, advocate for?
Well, one of them, well, this is kind of across the board, but one of the biggest issues that I'm seeing is that they're not being very accessible in one of the chambers, because one of the chambers is allowing virtual testimony limited, but some, and one of the chambers is not. So that's a big issue across the board. There's a lot of voting bills coming up, some of which are okay, some of which are not, that I'm tracking. And then there are two bills that I really want to pass that I'm hoping will pass this time. There's the Universal Design for Learning, which would teach all teachers how to create more inclusive lesson plans, whether they're teaching special ed or not.
Mm-hmm.
Really nice. HB 1 or HB 51 or HB 159 is that one. And then HB 3063 is the Michael Hickson bill, which would fix some problems with critical care decisions by paid guardians in COVID and other crisis care situations. So there's a lot going on. And then yeah, I think those two are the two big ones that I'm working on right now.
Okay. Celia, you.
Well, I know that Amy has been writing a lot, her letters, and I know that one of those letters inspired a dance that you put together, Tanya. So I'd like to hear the creative process between the two of you, and I'd like to hear from Amy a little bit about the writing of it's Dear Ableism, and how that series of letters started.
Well, where do you want to start first? Do you want to start with the dance or how that started?
Why don't we start with how the letter started? Because the letter was truly the inspiration for the movement.
Well, the letter started because I was doing one of those activities where you write a letter that you don't send to the person that you're mad at. We've all done that. So I was writing one of those, and I got about halfway through it, and I realized that I wasn't really mad at a person, that I was mad at the system that created a situation in which that person did something that made me mad. So I changed the label of the person that I was mad at to ableism, and I ended up presenting them that day at Lion and Pirate, and everyone got so excited about it that I started making it a series. So then Celia found out about it and went to Silva and said, Silva, I think this is a really good idea. And then Silva wrote to me and said, would you write one about art and Austin to ableism? So then I wrote it, and then Sylvia gave it to you to run with, and that's how it sort of ballooned.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in the dancing, just in the writing, so
Hmm.
I don't
Well,
really
I mean,
know how that happened.
I gotta say, Amy, you were really, you were really involved in the dancing because the letter, we sent out the letter and basically asked people to come up with a movement response to your letter. So you can think of everyone that's moving is actually responding to your letter. And so that's how the movement came about for the choreography. So it's actually, it's really personal for everyone. So we're just about done with editing the video. So I really encourage everyone to really look at each person's dance, because it truly is their interpretation, their response to your letter. And I gotta say, everyone in the dance was incredibly impressed with your letter and wholeheartedly supported you in the letter.
Well, thanks, guys. And the other thing that I've been working on in the pandemic is the Presbyterian Church did a Lenten series on disability and Lent for the Lenten devotionals. So I was a part of that, which was really cool. So I got to write a devotional actually for next weekend, and then I'm a part of a Zoom class with a bunch of women across the nation that do all sorts of advocacy. We all have different disabilities, so we're actually going through it every week. So that's been a really interesting intersection of art and writing and theology, and just being able to talk through what is happening in the pandemic has been really interesting for us. So that's been a really interesting, cool thing that I've been able to do lately too.
So if someone wants to connect with you and your art, do you have like a social media page or any way that they can connect with you and your art?
Well, I have my personal social media page, and then I recently created, which I don't even think I've told Celia about. I recently created a Dear Ableism Facebook page that I'm putting my digital visual art in, and my Dear Ableism letters. And some of them I'm sharing at Lion and Pirate, but I'm putting a few extra ones in there too, just so y'all don't have to wait for Lion and Pirate to show up to hear more. So.
And so Lion and Pirate, what is that? Like for those people that may not know what that is.
So Lion and Pirate is something that Art Spark has been doing in conjunction with some other groups, and it's an inclusive open mic that is usually at Malvern Books, but we've been doing it over Zoom. So that's how I started doing Dear Ableism. And I started it right as we started doing the Zoom instead of at Malvern Books. So that's how that started.
Yeah, that's a collaboration with Coalition of Texans with Disabilities, and does that meet monthly?
Yeah,
Or...
I think we're doing April 3rd this month because it would normally be on Easter, right?
Yep, you're correct. I was just checking that. Yeah.
Okay, so everyone, we've got a couple things going on. We got Elements class this Saturday, where we're actually going to be watching a performance and kind of having a discussion, and then we're going to teach some choreography based that we did for that performance. So I encourage everybody to kind of come out for that. And then don't forget about the Lion and Pirate open mic coming up as well.
And what about the performance? Can you tell us a little bit about where we might be able to see that, Tanya? Or we don't know that yet?
The
postcards?
You mean the performance for Elements?
No, the postcards from Austin.
We're actually still in the editing process right now. I'm actually meeting with the filmmaker tomorrow, and so we're really close to actually completing that project. So I'm not sure like how we're going to reveal the video, but you know.
Yeah, that was a collaboration with Austin Playhouse here in town.
Yeah.
So they're going to be putting it up on some YouTube channel. So that'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a mystery to me how they're going to reveal that.
Yeah, I think it's a mystery for them too.
and actually how many organizations are going to be involved in that, and if they're going to like string them all together, or
we don't know,
like release them separately.
Yeah, we don't know yet. They invited, I think, 6 organizations to create video postcards, and ours is one of the first ones that's close to completion. So they're working on that.
Wow. Well,
But I just on my Facebook page, Amy, I just put in deer in the search, and the very first thing that popped up was deer ableism. So it was the very first thing on my Facebook page that came up. So
probably because I already sent you an invitation.
Well, there you go.
I just liked it right when we were just chatting at the beginning. Well, I was looking around for letters to ableism, and then she said, "Oh, it's dear ableism." So, but I have a couple questions for you.
We can only see the top of your head, Susan dear. So can you?
Sorry. But it's the way that this. Okay.
There you go.
I need to sit on like a little pillow, or I think I'm on the shorter desk chair or something. You know, I think the cat has a higher one. You know, this one won't go up anymore. So Amy, I was thinking, not thinking, but I was wondering, have you thought about maybe taking your letters and your art and publishing those, or self-publishing? And
I've thought about it. I haven't really explored it really deeply though, because of my constraints with keeping my services and not going above a certain threshold with income. I would not be able to control how fast or how slow money would come in from sales. So I've been sort of thinking about how to monitor that. But yeah, it has crossed my mind. If I could figure out how to get it to work without messing everything else up, then I'll do it.
I wonder if you could designate funds to an organization such as ArtSpark Texas, or another.
I know. I've sort of been exploring that as sort of a side project. But
yeah, it was just I was like, oh, I wonder if she's thought about that. And I guess my other question that came up sort of towards the beginning. So you moved from St. Louis and came here to Austin. What year was that? Or like around
96.
96. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't really sure of your age, and I was like, oh, I wonder if that was like late 80s or early 90s. So, okay, that was
mid.
Those are my questions that.
Yeah.
talk about your solo vacation and um, that ability, how you did it, and how you accomplished that, and how hard that was.
Yeah, that was definitely hard. Yeah, I did that in 2015, and the the first half was during when I was also doing my master's thesis. So that was really hard 2 weeks because my master's thesis was due at the exact same time. So it was 10 hours a day of dancing, trying to find enough attendance to be able to go to the bathroom and eat. And luckily, my on-campus apartment was about 10 minutes from the gym. So I would eat really fast. I would go home and I would write for 45 minutes. And then I would come back and dance some more for another 5 hours. It was crazy. And when my professors found out I was doing it, they pretty much said, we don't know how the world are doing it. But it's also why the last 5 pages were my reflections on worship and dance. Because my head was in 3 different places at once. But yeah, it was really hard. I didn't know that my body could do that physically. I think I got more out of moving that much, just that much intensity of movement, than I did in 10 years of PT. Um, just because I stretched my body so much and my brain so much. I'm pretty sure my brain exploded at a couple of points. But yeah, and you're right. That it was a really big money question because there was money involved in the certification, so I had to plan that out some too, which is probably why it popped into your brain, Juan. But yeah, that was really cool, and I learned a lot about my teaching style and a lot about like my comfort level with sharing information, which I think really helped in my teaching advocacy world too, because a lot of like the introductory things and the like get everybody to think and move and work as a group are things that came from danceability and just getting people more comfortable expressing themselves, can involve just more than verbal talking. So I've really appreciated how that crosses over in both.
I know, I took the solo vacation with you. It was hard for me,
Yeah, it was
but
hard but good. We learned a lot.
yeah, we learned a lot, and we we had little less for that.
Yeah, and I really think we
You
came to get we really came together as a group too, which I think has
yeah,
helped body shift a lot, that
we
we got to
did,
know each other that
we
well.
did.
Oh, I think Susie wants to say something.
Oh, no, I was raising my hand there, but I will tell you, we just have a few minutes left.
Okay.
We'll have any more questions or comments.
Did Susie want to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I just wanted Amy to tell people what Fuzzy Baby did for you.
Oh yeah, Fussy Baby.
Oh, yeah.
So Body Shift went through this course with another artist a teaching artist
Yeah.
from TCU, and
Yeah.
and she has this method called rewire, and one of the pieces of it is called Fussy Baby, where you move your body in unpatterned ways and sort of kill your brain so that your body can rewire itself like babies do. and and we all sort of discovered that by turning off our brains, our bodies could do things that we wouldn't normally do. Like, if I'm really good about using Fussy Baby more often, I have less pain, my spasticity is calmer, and I can even turn myself over by myself. It's really cool. And at one point, I was like crawling around, which I don't do. So that was really cool. But I need to get back in the practice of doing it. So thank you for reminding me, Susie.
Yeah, and that research is actually still continuing. Hopefully, after the pandemic, we'll be able to hook back up with Nina and continue to work and continue to research how the rewire work affects people with cerebral palsy.
Yeah, Nina Martin is from TCU, has actually done presentations at Harvard and other places on this work, specifically on the work that she did here with our body shift dancers and the discoveries that she has made through this process. So it's pretty exciting for the attention that she's receiving and the researchers that are interested, and for what Tanya and Amy and Susie in particular experienced through the work. It's really remarkable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, I know. I did have another question for Amy. Oh, now and here I am putting us over the time. Sorry. When you said you were talking about speaking with nurses about legislation, and apparently this is something that you're doing every year with student nurses, I think I
Every
understand.
semester.
Yeah. So what things were you presenting to them?
Well, basically, we do a mock hearing where legislative staff come and pretend to be legislators, and then we teach them sort of the format of how to write a testimony, and the grad students actually have them written and researched, but the undergrads just have a written testimony, and then they come and practice, and the staff will ask questions. And we've actually got 4 or 5 people that, even though they're working in the session, have agreed to come on Zoom and still be our mock legislators. So that was exciting. So that's
Cool.
tomorrow morning. So no rest for the busy, but yeah.
Good work, though.
Great.
Yeah, and one of the nursing professors, her husband was actually a classmate of mine in grad school for ministry. So the connections are myriad and small. So
Yeah. Funny about that. Okay. Well, thank you, Amy and Tanya and everybody for coming.
Thank you to our Arts Park Texas funders: Texas Commission on the Arts, St. David's Foundation, Cultural Arts City of Austin Economic Development, National Endowment for the Arts, Creative Forces, Austin Public Library, Donald D. Hamill Foundation.